This is KPIX 5 News.
A quick verdict for the Northern California man accused of killing 4 women. Joseph Naso, guilty on all counts. Good evening, I'm Alan Martin. Elizabeth Cook is on assignment. Our Don Knapp was in the courtroom when the jury handed down its decision just hours ago. Don?
That's right, Alan. The guilty verdict came as no surprise to those in the courtroom who were familiar with the much talked about allegations of sexual assault, murder, and photographs of victims. It's been 2 years since Joseph Naso was arraigned on charges that he murdered 4 women, all of them prostitutes. The murders were all cold cases dating back to 1977, when the body of 18-year-old Roxine Rogash was found alongside Sir Francis Drake Boulevard, west of Fairfax. Her brother Larry has been at the trial nearly every day and says he would say these words to Naso.
Jump off a bridge, go kill yourself, go hang yourself on a cell, just save us some time and money. Just finish it, just get it finished.
After the testimony of 70 witnesses and the introduction of Naso's own self-incriminating writings and suggestive photographs, the jury spent about 3 hours yesterday and 2 hours today to find the 79-year-old guilty of first-degree murder in all 4 cases, and the special circumstance of multiple murders that makes him eligible for the death penalty. Besides killing Roxine Rogash, the jury says Naso also killed Carmen Colon, 22, whose body was found in Port Costa in 78, Pamela Parsons, 38, found in Yuba County in 93, and Tracy Tafoya, 31, found in Yuba County in 94. All the victims' first and last names had the same initial. Rogash says he came to the trial in memory of his sister Roxine and the other women too.
These are young girls, all of them are young girls, all of them forgotten. I haven't seen a single family member here since I've been here. I've been the only one here.
The jury will return September 4th to begin the penalty phase of the trial. Naso will again act as his own attorney as he attempts to avoid the death penalty. Alan?
Don, Larry Rogash, who you mentioned there, he's been quite vocal and active during the trial. He wrote messages on his truck. Any more from him?
Well, he was a little bit too active. A couple of times now the court has called him in. They said that, they asked the jurors if they had seen the messages. They were concerned that this might be jury contamination. Both times the judge ruled it was not.
Hello and welcome to the 3rd episode of the Truth Be Told podcast. I'm Sheddy.
I'm Shabs.
So Shabs, what have you been up to recently?
I've just been doing a lot of night shifts, so if I sound a little bit groggy, the listeners will know why.
I'm not sure how you manage a night shift normally. I don't think I could cope with the change of routine. I remember going on holiday a few years ago to Chicago, and it took me 3 days to get back into a routine. I kept falling asleep on the couch.
Well, if I do 3 or 4 nights in a row, it usually takes me about a week to readjust. But I'm getting better with it now. So what have you been up to this week then?
I've been one of them lucky few teachers that has a half term come early. So quite a few schools are off this week. Many of them actually off the week after, which is a bit strange. It ends up causing a lot of problems for parents when they've got children that go to different schools. Yeah,
it varies a lot in England. I wonder if it varies in other countries as well when half term is. They call it break, don't they? In other countries.
It is different in different schools across the country. Across the country and across the world, because in different countries it depends on what holiday they have. Like in America, I presume you'd have holidays for Thanksgiving and stuff like that, which you don't really have in the UK.
And spring break.
Yeah.
We have Easter holidays, which I guess is similar.
But even here, it varies, because depending on the school, schools have to set a calendar up beforehand. Some schools, for example, my school, have a calendar for the next 2 years.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and they need to ensure that if they've got various things like prize giving, or like my school is a Church of England school, it has a lot of religious services as well. In order for you to book certain venues, you have to have it on the calendar, and if you can't book it on that date, then the holidays begin to vary, like it has done now. But yeah, I'm enjoying this holiday, enjoying the week off, get a bit of time to myself.
Weather?
The weather in Manchester, are you kidding?
We've had hail, sleet, snow and rain pretty much for the last month.
Yeah, it has been, hasn't it? Snowed out a few days ago. Not as much, not as bad as it would be in America, I can imagine. I think a bit of snow happens there, everyone panics. Same with the electric cutting out. I remember once, a few years ago, moved here to this area, and the electric went out across the whole, probably street. All these people were walking out like people that I'd never seen before, walking out their doors, didn't know what to do. They thought they'd come to the end of the world because the electric went off.
Do you know, I think that was on Halloween, and there was a bunch of children who were trick-or-treating and the electric went off and I heard everybody screaming and running home.
This Halloween?
No, a few Halloweens ago.
Yeah, I remember a few years ago. But,
that was actually really funny.
In some countries, I mean, it's not really an issue, is it? I mean, the electric goes, people just carry on as normal, so...
Yeah.
Okay, so what we're going to do today is we are focusing on our third episode. It's the Alphabet Murders. It's going to be narrated by Shabs. We're going to go across... not across the seas. We're going to go across the seas. And I hope you enjoy this episode. And do keep following us on Twitter, on Facebook. You can also download us on iTunes and Stitcher. And you can also follow us on YouTube. Episode 3. The Alphabet Murders.
Between 1971 and 1973, 3 young girls, aged 10 to 11, were found sexually assaulted and slain near Rochester, New York. The murders were named the Alphabet Murders due to the victims all having double initials for their first and last names, and they were all found dead in suburbs with names in which the first letter coordinated with the girls' initials. The victims were Carmen Colon, Wanda Walkowitz, and Michelle Mienza. Carmen Colon was the first victim, a 10-year-old girl with an effervescent smile. Carmen lived with her grandparents when she disappeared on November the 16th, 1971, from the Bull's Head neighborhood in southwest Rochester. 2 days later, 2 young teenage boys were cycling along Stearns Road in Rager when they spotted a tiny body in a ditch. At first they thought it was a doll someone had tossed aside. Instead, it was the body of Carmen Colon, who had disappeared 2 days before she had left a drugstore on West Main Street near her Brown Street home. Carmen had been strangled and sexually assaulted, the medical examiner determined. Fingernail marks had scarred her neck and much of her body. Once media accounts circulated about her slaying, another unsettling report came to the fore. Dozens of drivers may have seen Carmen running semi-naked along Interstate 490 westbound, about a mile east of Riga. After the discovery of Carmen's body, several drivers reported to police that they'd seen the young girl, almost naked, with a car backing along the shoulder toward her in the afternoon of her disappearance. Most cars were driving upward of 70 miles per hour when they passed her and no one stopped, with the drivers apparently unsure of what they'd seen. Cell phones, of course, were not in use then. Almost 17 months later, in April 1973, Wanda Walkowitz, 11, vanished from the neighborhood near her Avenue D home. She was also found slain the next day in an isolated area at a restaurant in Webster. It was reported by Wanda's sister that Wanda had been sent to the store. At the store, Wanda bought $8.52 worth of groceries, including tuna fish, milk, cupcakes, and cat food. She left the store and vanished. The next day, a state police trooper found Wanda's body in Webster, near the bottom of an embankment at a rest stop off of Route 104. Like Carmen Colon, she had been strangled, possibly with a belt, and raped. Like Carmen, she disappeared in the late afternoon while running an errand for the family. Police quickly drew parallels with Carmen's killing. Tips rolled in, including reports that a man driving a brown car had pulled a red-haired girl into the car around Conkey Avenue the day of Wanda's abduction. The car did not match the one seen on Interstate 490 in Carmen's case. And as with Carmen, police could not make an arrest. The crime remained unsolved when, 6 months later, someone grabbed 11-year-old Michelle Mienza off the streets near her Rochester home on Webster Crescent. Her corpse was found 2 days later in a largely rural stretch of Wayne County in the town of Maidstone. Michelle, a chubby shy girl, had been at the Goodman Plaza shortly before she went missing. Her uncle had seen Michelle at the plaza and offered to give her a ride home, but she had declined. Unlike the first two killings, however, police developed some solid leads about Michelle's disappearance. Later on the day she went missing, a woman saw a young girl resembling Michelle in a car at a fast food restaurant in Penfield. A man was walking towards the car with a bag of food. Michelle's autopsy revealed she'd eaten a hamburger. Also that evening, a man stopped along Route 350 in Walworth after he saw a car stopping with an apparent flat tyre. A girl resembling Michelle sat in the car. The man with the flat tyre made it apparent he wanted no help, so the would-be Good Samaritan continued on his way. Both witnesses gave similar descriptions of the man they saw, and police developed a composite that the media displayed for weeks. Calls came in by the thousands, many of them of little help. In fact, when the calls tapered off, they still numbered about 75 an hour during daytime hours. Police picked up debris along the likely path from the restaurant to Eddy Road where Michelle was found dead. The possible evidence filled the beds of several pickup trucks. The investigation was ongoing when on January 1st, 1974, a Rochester fireman named Dennis Termini tried to rape a teenage girl in a garage. Police intervened and Termini ran. Police closed in on him and Termini pulled out a handgun, a .45 automatic pistol which he put to his head and shot himself. Termini, police decided, had raped another teenager in a garage. While both victims were older than the girls in the double initial murders, investigators thought Termini might be a prime suspect, and other evidence bolstered that belief. His car matched the description of cars seen in the abductions, and a map in his car was folded in a way highlighting Wayne County. Also, Termini kept his firefighter uniform in the car, and police suspected that only an apparent authority figure could have lured the girls into the vehicles without a fight. For decades, Termini would stay at the top of the list of possible suspects. This theory was incorrect, however, as in 2007, DNA evidence concluded that Termini was not involved in the Alphabet murders. On April 1st, 2011, 77-year-old Joseph Naso, a New York native who lived in Rochester during the 1970s, was arrested in Reno, Nevada for 4 murders in California between 1977 and 1994. He was a professional photographer who had traveled between New York and California extensively for decades. All 4 of the murdered women were described as prostitutes who had been raped and strangled. The victims, like the victims in Rochester, all had double initials. One of them was a 23-year-old woman, also called Carmen Colon, having the exact same name as the 10-year-old Carmen Colon who was murdered in Rochester. Colon's body was found near Carquinez Scenic Drive in Port Costa in Contra Costa County on August 15, 1978. Naso, a former commercial photographer, was also found guilty of the murders of Pamela Parsons, 38, and Tracy Tafoya, 31, whose bodies were found in Yuba County in September 1993 and August 1994, respectively. The jury saw Naso acting as his own attorney, smiling and wearing a suit and tie during the 2-month trial. Naso was arrested after visiting probation officers found disturbing photographs of nude women in unnatural positions. They appeared unconscious or dead. Naso called it art. Deputy District Attorney Rosemary Sloat called it criminal, claiming Naso drugged and photographed his victims, strangled them, and dumped their naked bodies in rural areas of Marin and Contra Costa counties in the 1970s. Evidence against Naso included a handwritten list that prosecutors allege refers to at least 7 women, including the 4 victims, and some of the locations where their bodies were found. During the trial, the prosecution presented 70 witnesses, and Naso called 7 to the stand. On November 2013, Naso was sentenced to death for the murders in California. Naso was also a person of interest in the Alphabet murders, however, was ruled out of that case when DNA found on Californian victims was not matched to the DNA found on the bodies of the Rochester victims. The Alphabet killer's identity remains unknown to this day. So in the media, in 2001, the Discovery Channel aired a programme revisiting the murders. In 2008, there was a Hollywood film, The Alphabet Killer, which was very loosely based on the Alphabet murders. In 2010, there was a book called The Alphabet Killer, The True Story of the Double Initial Murders. On April 1st, 2011, the AMC network aired a short documentary titled Countdown to the Killing, The Alphabet Murders. There's also a novel by Agatha Christie featuring Hercule Poirot called The ABC Murders, which is also quite similar in that the killer in the story murders women with the same letter initials as to the place where they were murdered.
So there you have it, the Alphabet murders. This one's remained unsolved, and it's a shame really, because I always think back to how it affects the families. The children were relatively young that died. I don't know if it's just me, and I shouldn't really think like this, but I find it more of a shame when children are actually murdered. I'm not sure what you think about that.
I think it's because they're so vulnerable, aren't they, and they don't really have a chance to defend themselves. I think it's, always a shame when somebody's murdered, even if it's an adult, but when someone is young, it just seems a lot worse because it seems like they never really had a chance.
It must be absolutely horrific for the families, though. Imagine living through that all your life, trying to follow up on leads, trying to, I can imagine it not necessarily just affects the family. There's been instances where if you have a person on the case, so someone on the police force that's on the actual case itself, they have to live with that for the rest of their life, and it can have a major impact on most of their career, really.
Yeah, I mean, it must be really difficult if you're in charge of solving these crimes and you feel a bit of a failure if you've not managed to catch the person, and I guess you're always going to worry that the person's going to strike again.
Do you remember the TV program that we were watching recently about crime? It's called Real Detective, if you
Yeah.
remember that. And a lot of the cases in that, even though they were solved in the end, the impact that it had on some of the police officers or the detectives that were working the cases was devastating. And I'm talking about detectives that have probably been on the force or been a homicide detective for more than something like 30, 40 years we were looking
Yeah.
at.
Yeah. Like their whole lives, and then one case just kind of breaks them mentally, doesn't it?
It seemed to be the case on Real Detective that the cases that really broke them were the ones that involved younger children or younger people. And I'm not saying for 1 minute that that's any better than adults being murdered. That, it's just as horrific. But a whole life gone, a family that's growing up and has lost a sibling, the impact it must have on brothers and sisters or the parents for that matter is absolutely shocking. What I would say though, in recent times as well, especially with technological advances, that if there was samples of DNA that might have been found on the victims, sometimes that can now with DNA profiling or profiling for that matter, they can actually locate and find criminals. So you never know, this case might not remain unsolved forever.
The DNA evidencing obviously helped to disprove Naso and Tamini because they thought that they were the suspects at the time. And I suppose that's difficult for the family as well, because you probably think, oh yeah, we finally got the person, and then it turns out that actually, no, it isn't that person.
That's really bad. However, it's just as bad for the person that's been arrested and put away for something they haven't committed. And we hear of numerous cases where someone will go down for many, many years and then the DNA proves otherwise. And that must be horrific as well.
That's true. But in this case, both of them had committed other similar crimes, hadn't they? So they got their just deserves.
Yeah. And I guess DNA sampling as well, any sort of criminal evidence that you put away into storage has to have, it can't degrade over time as well, because that can have a major impact. So, I mean, there must be masses of evidence out there in the real world where it's just out the way and sat there on shelves for many, many years, and that can get damaged over time, or it certainly can get contaminated as well.
It's quite interesting because I listened to another podcaster about true ghost stories, and in there they were talking about hauntings that happen in warehouses where they store police kind of evidence. I was just listening to that the other week, so that's quite interesting that you mentioned that.
Well, what happened there? What did they mention?
They were just talking about how they think a place like that would have very bad energy and could attract like the supernatural, because they store like forensic evidence for years and years and years. And then sometimes, this show is in America, so sometimes they actually sell off some of the items that weren't directly related to the crime, but were kept for forensic purposes. So imagine buying a clock in a room that someone had been murdered in.
Do you think that would? I don't think that would appeal to me, to be honest with you.
If people like that sort of thing when they're into the supernatural, don't they?
Yeah, probably true.
Just one other thing about this case. There's obviously the killer wasn't found, so there's quite a few theories. One of the theories, which I find interesting, is that there was multiple killers, and it wasn't.
You say something like maybe, you say there were multiple killers, but are you assuming there might have been copycat murders? Something like that?
Well, there's two theories. One is that there's copycat murders, and then the second one was that there were actually just two separate people. And that's how they got away with it.
So what you're saying is that the two people were known to each other, or were they independent?
I think known to each other.
That makes it all the more difficult, isn't it? It's not often for serial killers, for that matter, that do always work in pairs. It's strange when you do find murders such as Myra Hindley and Ian Brady, Rosemary and Fred West.
We should cover that one.
Examples like that where the couples did murder together, but it must be a very, very strange concept in that field of crime, I would say, that you'd find someone who has similarities to do such a heinous crime as what you would want to do. I don't know what you think about that.
I think a lot of it is to do with having like codependent relationships. So I can see it stemming from there. So two troubled people finding solace in each other and then turn into crime.
I mean, this kind of goes against the grain, but Myra Hindley, if you look at her history, and it's something we will cover at some point, but with Myra Hindley in particular, from what you read, she had a decent upbringing. She had a decent upbringing, no real trouble from what you could see. It was unexpected for someone like her. She didn't characterize the normal type of serial killer per se, but she went ahead and did that with Ian Brady. Maybe because she looked up to Brady and seemed to have a lot of respect for him because he was older, definitely.
Well, it'll be interesting to cover the theories when we talk about that story because that one's quite close to home, isn't it?
Definitely close to home, shockingly close to home. Often when I'm at work, I'll often speak to people and mention how close Myra Hindley was to where we are. But I guess,
Yes, crimes happen everywhere, don't
Yeah,
they?
they do.
You're not always aware where they take place.
You don't really hear about it as much now, especially with so many. When we were younger, you used to spend a lot of time know everybody in your local area. You knew. I remember the streets used to be full of all your neighbours playing out, and you'd have parents on the doorsteps, and you'd know everybody there. Now it's almost a shock to know someone who lives two doors from where you live. So you don't really hear it as much in the media, do you? So.
Well, I suppose you just don't know who you're living next to anymore, and it's a shame. I mean, our neighbours could be serial killers for all we know.
Our neighbours, well, that'll be my brother that lives. Our brother, should I say, that lives next door. So, just on that thought, I was thinking of doing the next episode on Dr. Harold Shipman.
That's not our brother.
No. It doesn't look like him either, to be honest.
Maybe a little bit when he goes. Give him a few years.
A bit grumpy like Harold Shipman.
Lose a bit of hair.
Yeah. To be honest with you, well, Harold Shipman, yeah, that'd be a fascinating one to actually cover. Again, that's actually not too far away. We say that, but it wasn't too far away. Just an interesting point on that. It was actually not my brother that's the doctor. It's another brother of ours. It was his friend's GP.
Oh, really?
I bet you didn't know that.
No?
And my brother's friend actually said that he was a very nice GP.
Oh, really?
He was
nice to him because he didn't have a lot of money?
No, I think it was perfectly nice to the younger patients that went there. It was an issue with elderly patients, as we will, hopefully discover as we read through what happened. And I think it'd actually be quite good to get the views of Dr. H on that episode as well, in regards to a lot of the things that went wrong and how Harold Shipman was actually caught.
Do you think Harold Shipman is known worldwide?
It would highly surprise me if he wasn't known worldwide, because in terms of the UK, he's actually considered the most prolific serial killer. I
didn't actually realise that myself.
I've got a feeling he had over 200, they say over 200 victims in total.
I honestly didn't realise the number was that high, but stay tuned for that one. That will be an interesting episode.
It will indeed.
Please follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Stitcher, iTunes, and now Spotify for Android users. You'll find the links in our show notes. So I'm your host, Shabs.
And I'm Sheddy.
See you again soon.
Ciao for now.